Hello students, today we are going to learn the poem A Legend of Northland written by Phoebe Carey. So first of all, let us learn more about the poet Phoebe Carey. She was an American poet and the younger sister of poet Alice Carey. The sisters, they co-published poems in 1849 and then each went on to publish volumes of their own. Talking about Phoebe Carey, she was also a champion of women's rights. She was a determined girl, and some of Phoebe Carey's celebrated works are Poems of Alice and Phoebe Carey, Poems and Paradise, then Poems of Faith, Hope, and Love. Now, students, the poem that we are going to read today, A Legend of Northland, it is a ballad. A ballad is a poem narrating a story in short stanzas. So this poem is a kind of poem which tells a story in short stanzas, and in the poem, all the stanzas comprise 4 lines. In total, there are 16 stanzas in this poem, and these stanzas will tell us a story. Now, ballads are a part of folk culture or popular culture and are passed on orally from one generation to the next generation. So the story, it is of Northland area, which is narrated in the poem, and the area which is near the North Pole. Legend refers to an historical story, one which is very old and has been passed on from generation to generation. So, dear students, the poet in the poem narrates the legend of Saint Peter and his interaction with an old lady. Saint Peter, who used to wander about, who used to move about around the world and give religious teachings to the people. So it tells us a story how a greedy and selfish lady angered Saint Peter once. Saint Peter, he was an apostle of Lord Christ, Jesus Christ, and he was a very kind and noble soul. But because of her greed and miserliness, he became angry and he curses her. So let's read the poem and understand what happens next in the story narrated by the poet in the poem, A Legend of Northland. So let's read the poem stanza-wise and we'll try to understand the paraphrasing also. Away, away in the Northland, where the hours of the day are few, and the nights are so long in winter that they cannot sleep them through. So the poet is here referring to the region around the North Pole, that is the Northland, and he tells us that the duration of the day is very less because its position is such that the sun rays reach for a very less time. So when this area is experiencing winter season, the duration of night is very long and the daytime hours are very less. And it is difficult for the people to sleep for such long hours at night. So see the student, a map is shown here and this is the North Pole and the regions here are referred. Some parts of Alaska, Russia, then Greenland, Scandinavia, Canada. So these are some of the regions which actually lie in the area of the North Pole. So the poet says that the duration of the nighttime is so long that people cannot sleep them through. Sleep them through means sleep the whole night. Because if they go to bed, take a few hours of sleep and then they wake up, it is still nighttime. So he wants to emphasize on the fact that the duration of night is very long in the northern regions. And here they refers to the people of the region so that they cannot sleep them through. When they harness the swift reindeer to the sledges when it snows and the children look like bear's cub in their funny furry clothes. Now see, the here sledges refers to a vehicle or which are actually pulled by some animals like reindeer or draught animals, and the sledge, it runs on snow. Harness. Harness means to tie the animal with the rope to the sledge so that it can be used for transportation. Swift. The meaning of swift here refers to something which runs very fast. So as the northern region experiences severe cold condition and it is a snowy area, the reindeer is an animal which is found in this polar region, and people, they tie the reindeers to the sledges and then the reindeers pull the sledges. So where they harness the swift reindeer to the sledges when it snows, and the children look like bears' cubs in funny furry clothes. Here, the poet adds that as it is winter season, so children, they look like young ones of bear because they wear funny looking clothes made of fur, which is like the furry skin of a bear. So here he is comparing the little children with the young ones of the bear. They tell them a curious story. I don't believe 'tis true, and yet you may learn a lesson if I tell the tale to you. And here they refers to the parents or the elders. Them here refers to the children or the younger generation. Now the elders of the Northland region tell a strange and interesting story to the younger generation. The story is quite famous there. The poet says that he does not think that the story is quite true, but if he tells the story to the reader, maybe the reader could learn a lesson from it. The story, it gives an important message. And that is why the poet is hopeful that he will be able to convey an important lesson of life. That is why he wishes to narrate this story. So he says, and yet you may learn a lesson if I tell the tale to you. Tale means the story. Once when the good Saint Peter lived in the world below and walked about it preaching just as he did, you know. So here Saint Peter refers to an apostle of Christ. Apostle means a disciple or follower of Jesus Christ. Preaching means to give religious talks. So here the poet starts with the story by narrating that once there was a saint whose name was Saint Peter, and he was a very noble and kind man. So the story, it is about Saint Peter and his interaction with an old lady. So when Saint Peter, he used to live in the world, lived in the world below means when he was alive and he lived in the world, he went around giving religious lectures to the people just like all saints do, just as he did, you know, means just as the saints do. And then an incident happens. So let's read what that incident is. He came to the door of a cottage in traveling round the earth, where a little woman was making cakes and baking them on the hearth. Now see students, hearth means a fireplace. You know, in earlier days, fireplace was used as place for cooking also. So people used to bake cakes here and cook their food in the fireplace. Fireplace is also used to keep a place or keep oneself warm. So this place was also used for cooking food. So once what happened when the Saint Peter, he was moving around the world giving religious lectures to the people, he reached a village and he reached the door of a cottage where he saw a small woman, an old woman who was making cakes. So she was baking the cakes in the fireplace and being faint with fasting, for the day was almost done. He asked her from her store of cakes to give him a single one. Now, the saint had not eaten anything the entire day. He was wandering around, he was moving about, giving lectures. So he had been fasting. So faint means becoming weak. Fasting means not having anything to eat. So the day was also coming to an end. The day was almost done. So he was hungry and feeling very weak. He went to this woman who was baking cakes and he asked for one cake out of the many cakes that she had baked. So he asked her from her store of cakes to give him a single one. So she made a very little cake, but as it baking lay, she looked at it and thought it seemed too large to give it away. Now the woman, she started baking a cake for the saint. But as the cake lay baking, she became little selfish and she did not give the cake from her store to the saint. She tried to bake another cake, but what happened is, to her, the cake appeared to be quite big in size, and thus she was not ready to give the cake to the saint, and thus she refused to give the cake. Instead, therefore, she needed another and still a smaller one. But it looked, when she turned it over, as large as the first had done. Now, needed means to make dough from flour. The little miser woman thought that the cake was too big to be given away. So her selfish nature prompted her to bake another cake, and she started making another smaller cake. But when she looked at that cake again, she felt that it was still as big as the previous one, and she was not ready to give this smaller cake to the saint. She refused to give that smaller cake also to the saint. Then she took a tiny scrap of dough and rolled it flat and baked it thin as a wafer, but she couldn't part with that. The third time she took a very small amount of dough. Tiny scrap means very small amount. And she started rolling it. So she rolled and rolled it. And thus she rolled it to make it into a very thin cake, just like a wafer. And thus, when the cake was baked again, she became greedy again, and she could not give that thin piece of bread, the cake, to the saint. And for she said, my cakes that seem too small, when I eat of them myself, are yet too large to give away. So she put them on the shelf. The woman reasoned that when she ate the cakes, she felt that they were very small. But if she had to give them to someone, she felt that they were too big to be given away. So she gave the reason to convince herself that she was doing the right thing. What she said, that when she would eat the cakes, they would seem too small. And when it comes to giving it to someone, it seemed to be a big one. So what did she do? She put all the cakes on the shelf of her kitchen, and thus she did not give any cake to Saint Peter. Then good Saint Peter grew angry, for he was hungry and faint, and surely such a woman was enough to provoke a saint. To provoke means causing to get angry. And Saint Peter became angry. Because of the miserly nature of the woman, the saint was provoked. And he actually, in his anger, because he was hungry and faint, the whole day he had not eaten anything. And he was hungry, he was feeling very weak. But this selfish woman was not ready to give him even a small cake. Thus, the behavior of this greedy woman angered the saint. And then what he said? And he said, you are far too selfish to dwell in a human form, to have both food and shelter and fire to keep you warm. Saint Peter, in his anger, cursed the woman. And he said that she was very selfish. She did not deserve to live like a human being. He added that God had blessed her with food, shelter, and fire to keep her warm. But she had become so selfish that she was not ready to share the resources blessed to her with anybody. So to dwell means to live in human form. And thus, in his anger, the saint, he cursed the woman that she did not deserve to live like a human being. She was so miser that she was not ready to share the blessings that she had, the blessings of food, shelter, and fire. to keep her warm. Now you shall build as the birds do, and shall get your scanty food by boring and boring and boring all day in the hard dry wood. So the saint, he cursed the woman. He added, now here the word scanty, it refers to very little amount. Boring here does not means a lazy day. Here it means making a hole in something or digging into something. So he said that she would become a bird because she did not deserve the human form. So the saint, he cursed the woman to be changed into a bird. And he also added that she would become a bird, and just like birds, they build their nest, they build their house, and the way they find their food by boring into the wood, she would also live the same life. She would also work hard in the dry wood all day, entire day, and get little food to live and make a small place for herself to live in. So she was cursed badly by the saint here because he became angry. Then up she went through the chimney, never speaking a word, and out of the top flew a woodpecker, for she was changed to a bird. Now, as Saint Peter cursed the woman, she did not get even a chance to speak for herself. She did not even get a chance to explain or apologize in front of the saint, because in that very moment she flew up to the roof through the chimney, and as she came out of the chimney, she was already converted into a bird. She was converted into a woodpecker. Woodpecker में convert हो गई थी. She had a scarlet cap on her head, and that was left the same, but all the rest of her clothes were burned black as a coal in the flame. So when the woman turned into a bird at that time, she was wearing a red colored cap on her head. So scarlet refers to bright red color cap. She was wearing that cap. And this cap was there on the head of the bird also. But the woman's remaining clothes had burned completely and turned black in color, just like a coal. Just similar to the coal, the bird's dress, it was burnt totally, and only the cap was left which the woman was wearing. And every country schoolboy has seen her in the wood, where she lives in the trees till this very day, boring and boring for food. So people who live in the countryside, country refers to the village area. So the people and the children, those who live in the countryside, even the small children who go to school, they see this kind of bird in the woods. Woods refers to here the forest. So they see this kind of the bird in the forest. And when they see this kind of the bird, they find the bird staying there, which is continuously digging the wood with her beak to collect her food. And the bird is found digging the wood for collecting the food. And whenever any child sees this kind of the bird, their elders tell them this story. They say that the bird used to be a woman earlier. She was very greedy, and so she was cursed by Saint Peter and turned into a bird. They get a teaching that they should not be greedy. So this poem actually gives us a very important lesson of life, that we should not be greedy. So this was about the paraphrasing about the poem. Now let us understand the theme. The central idea of the poem is greed and selfishness can result in serious complications. Now the way the woman, she got Saint Peter angry, and then how she had to bear the consequences as she was cursed and she was converted into a bird. So greed is also considered to be a grave sin. The poem A Legend of the Northland, it beautifully highlights this truth. People who are greedy, they not only worsen others' problems and sufferings, but also attract untold misery for themselves. They not only make other people's life worse, but it so happens that they invite trouble in their life too. So The legend emphasizes on the value of generosity, charity, that we should be kind and compassionate towards others. Now, students, let us quickly understand some literary device, the poetic devices or figures of speech used in the poem. First of all, talking about the rhyme scheme. Let us first understand the rhyme scheme. If you read the stanzas here, she had a scarlet cap on her head. Now, how to prepare a rhyme scheme? See, I have written few alphabets here. The first line I have written A, and that was left the same. Now see, the same word is not rhyming with the word head, and that's why I have written here B. But all the rest of her clothes were burned. Now again, it is not rhyming with same and head. So the alphabet C. Black as a coal in the flame. Now see, this flame word is actually rhyming with same. So we will repeat the word B here with the flame also. And thus we find the rhyme scheme A, B, C, B. Now let us see again. And every country schoolboy has seen her in the wood. So first line A, second B, where she lives in the trees till this very day, boring and boring for food. C, B. So this A, B, C, B is the rhyme scheme of the poem, and it is used throughout the poem. Then there is the use of alliteration. Alliteration is the repetition of a consonant sound in two or more close words. Like in stanza 1, that they sleep them through, the sound is repeated. Then look like, funny, furry, they, them. Yet you learn lesson, tell tale too. More examples. Woman was them the hearth, faint fasting, still smaller, took tiny, seem small, build birds, boring, boring. The burr sound repeated. Next is the repetition, the poetic device where one word or sentence is repeated to lay emphasis on it. Like in stanza 1, away, away in a northland. That means referring to that the place was far, far away in the northern area of the earth. So away, away, the word is repeated, then rolled word is repeated, then boring word is repeated in 13th and 16th stanza. Next is simile, a comparison used, and the words are used as and like to show the comparison when one thing is compared with another. In stanza 2, the children look like bear's cubs, children compared to the bear's cubs. Stanza 9, baked it thin as a wafer. So cake is compared to a wafer. The word is used as. Clothes were burned black as coal. The color of the burnt clothes is compared to that of coal. Then there is enjambment. Enjambment means running lines of poetry from one to the next without using any kind of punctuation to indicate a stop. So when there is continuity of lines in succession, but no punctuation is used, that is called enjambment. So you will find quite a lot of line stanzas in the poem where enjambment is used. So in stanza 1, line 3 and 4, if you see it in your poem, that there is no punctuation mark in line number 3 and poem 4. Then in stanza 2, line number 1 and 2, so there is no punctuation mark. So similar way, enjambment is used throughout the poem. So these are some of the literary devices used in the poem. And this is all about the poem, A Legend of Northland, written by Phoebe Carey. Thank you, students. Have a nice day, all of you.